think about education, we often think about the subjects that we study: math, history, chemistry, among many others. We go to school to learn valuable skills that will allow us to be more productive in the future and hopefully to get a better job. School also teaches us values and attitudes. For example, every morning, many kids pledge allegiance to the flag in their school. This is not because you will need this to get a job in the future, but because society wants to raise children who love their country and will be loyal to it. School also teaches tolerance, perseverance, and kindness to our fellow students. And while these values are considered admirable, some of these values taught in schools might conflict with our own ideologies. And as a result, many of the recent debates around education have focused on the values that should be taught in the school. The idea behind such debates is that by changing the values and the attitudes, we might eventually impact the decisions that students make once they leave school. So the question is, does a school curriculum change not only students' values, but also their decisions later in life? This is very challenging to measure. As you will imagine, you will have to wait many years, even decades, to assess the impact of certain curriculum. Here is where using historical evidence comes in handy. Rather than looking at the US today, we can look instead at what happened in other countries many years ago where policies aimed at changing the student values were implemented. In this project, I focus on Spain, which, unlike Germany or Italy, remained under a dictatorship after World War II until the mid-70s, when the country peacefully transitioned to a democracy. During this period, when Franco's dictatorship was still in place, most women between the ages of 15 and 18 were required to take a 6-month class called the social service. This class was similar to other home economic classes at the time, where young women were learning how to cook and how to take care of the home. In these classes, however, great efforts were also devoted to indoctrination and to political propaganda. In particular, they promoted the traditional Catholic family centered on very strong and well-defined gender roles. The social service was in place for almost 4 decades until it was finally abolished in 1978. This sudden policy change is going to allow us to study the impact that this class had on women's decisions later in life. For this project, I'm going to focus on the province of Avila, which is close to Madrid, as it was the only place to keep detailed records of enrollment. Here, we can see a map of enrollment for the entire province, divided by the towns for the cohort of women born in 1960. These women were around 18 years old when the social service was abolished. On average, between 80 to 100% of eligible women in these towns took this class at the time. When we look at the next cohort, the one born in 1961, we see that many of the dark green towns have now turned white. What this means is that the class ended at those locations precisely for the women who were born in 1961, which is going to create a sharp difference that we're going to be able to use for our analysis. We can compare women born in 1960, many of whom enrolled in the class, with the other women that were born 1 year after in the same location but that did not attend the class. A similar pattern happens for women born in 1962, with only a handful of locations still having some enrollment. You can still see that the pattern continued to emerge even for the generation born in 1963, where now only 1 town has positive enrollment. For women born in 1964, none of them participated in the social service. Using this variation, we can compare cohorts of women that are exposed to similar economic and social factors, but the only difference between them being whether they took the class or not. What we find is that the class was successful in ingraining traditional gender roles. Cohorts of women exposed to the social service got married 10 months younger than those cohorts that did not attend the class. We also find that when married, women that took the class had similar jobs than those who did not. However, once they have their first child, women that took the class were 14% more likely to drop out of the labor force and become a stay-at-home mother, in line with the values that they were taught during the class. These results indicate that the social service impacted women's choices, but also these impacts were quite persistent. Most of the women took the class when they were 16 years old. and on average, women were having their first kid at the time when they were 26 years old. This means that some of their decisions took place a decade after they enrolled in the social service, meaning that the class was still having a very long-lasting impact. Evidence from marriage certificates also suggests that the underlying mechanism is an increase in religiosity among the women that took the social service. At the time, non-religious weddings were very uncommon. Less than 9% of the ceremonies were not in a church. However, women that took the social service were half as likely to have a non-religious wedding compared to the cohort right after that did not take the class. In addition, we also find that those women are more likely to be affiliated with the Conservative Party, which has an ideology more aligned with the previous dictatorship. When we look at the towns where there was no enrollment in the social service, we do not find any of the previous effects. Even when we look at the trends of younger women, who were perhaps moving away from religious regardless of their education, they are not strong enough to explain our findings. Overall, we find that the school curriculum had a strong and persistent impact on students. This can help us understand why so much of the recent political debate about education has focused not just on the subjects that we teach to students, such as calculus or history, but also on what values we are teaching to them. The values that children learn in the classroom can stay with them for their entire lives and change their family decisions, their religion, their job, and their political affiliations.